Once we start, we will have to ask you to take a step back behind the cameras because we're going live. So, siguro yung mga kaibigan natin na mga photogs, pwede nang kumuha ngayon ng mga pictures in the next few minutes. Pwede na dito sa gitna so that after you take your shots, then mag-umpisa na po tayo. Thank you.
Have they come? Sabi mo sila? Group photo? O wala na group? Ngayon na. After na. Okay. Okay, sige. Okay. Hi, Maria. How are you? Everyone's here na.
Ricardo,
Except
P. Latida, FS,
President?
President and Chancellor of Johnson. He doesn't want to sit down though.
Okay. Okay lang. Acknowledge lang. Alright. Sige, okay na siguro yan. So thank you very much to our photographer friends. So we'll be starting in a few minutes. So we'll ask you to please step behind the line so that we can start our proceedings for this afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the Chief Justice Meets the Press. As you well know, it has been a year since the Chief Justice was appointed by the President to head the Supreme Court and lead the judiciary. Today is the first occasion for the Chief Justice to meet the press since her appointment, and so we are quite happy that you are all here to join us. Before we ask the Chief Justice to give her short statement, we would like to acknowledge the presence of our host for this afternoon, Brother President and Chancellor of De La Salle University, Brother Ricardo P. Laguda, FSC. Thank you. Thank you, Brother President. To start us off, the Chief Justice has a brief statement. Ladies and gentlemen, the Chief Justice of the Republic of the Philippines, Maria Lourdes P.A. Serrano.
good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to see eager faces in the audience. Some of you are poised to ask me questions. Some are already making notes and tweeting directly to the public. Some of you are taking visual shots. And I appreciate all of these different roles you are discharging this afternoon, all because of one purpose, and that is you are trying to communicate to a wide audience what the leadership of the judiciary looks like and what that leadership probably means for the country, and especially for the future. I have to thank your various news organizations represented here. Indeed, it is an honor for me to see all of you here. You have made available to us all these expensive facilities, and I do not take that for granted. You have also made available to us your very precious time. Your presence alone means a lot because you are going to spend time here with me to talk about many things regarding the institution I represent. Our Chief of the Public Information Office, Professor and Attorney Theodore Te, had been constantly proposing to me various ways for me to make a public oral report on the judiciary without turning off the most important ally that the judiciary could have, which is the media, in reaching the general public. You have by now your copies of the text-only version of the annual report. I was warned by Attorney Te that to make a straight report to you out of the annual report, even if it takes much less time than the President's delivery of his SONA address last July, might not be sufficiently responsive to the quick, precise, and fast turnaround time that you in the news organizations require. So it had to take quite some time for me to bridge my world, which is contemplative, which takes a lot of time to gestate ideas, to nurture them into fruition, and before I make my long written decisions, to reach your world, which is made up, for some of you, of quick sound bites, some of you of good visuals, but all with the purpose of trying to communicate as efficiently as possible to the public your thoughts with an efficient use of time. My world, of course, is different. So I thank you that you had been patient with me, because I had to make this transition myself from a judge who is used to dealing with reams of paper to the world that you represent in the most efficient electronic ways possible. But because I am not an expert on these things, and in fact, aside from my short press conference I made way back when I was executive director of the AIM Policy Center for a brief spell, that was my only time when I had a press conference experience. I am not an expert on these things. So he was warning me that I could not deliver a 40-minute address the way I wanted it, an abridged version of a report. But actually, you could tell me later that maybe he is wrong, and you could tolerate more as listening to me for much longer than 10 minutes. I welcomed this Meet the Press session, and you might have asked yourselves why. Because first, it resonates with the policy of transparency that I and the rest of my colleagues in the Supreme Court wants to institute as a way of doing things in the judiciary. Of course, you're all very well aware that we have all our constitutional, legal, and institutional constraints, and there are many things we cannot communicate directly to the public, because the process, for example, of collegial decision-making is a very private one. But to the extent that we can actually communicate directly to the public all of these things and make these as transparent as possible without impeding our work, we will do that. That is why you might have noticed that we had made available to the public podcasts of the oral arguments. That was a new technology for us. We were not really sure how the public would respond, but we wanted you to understand that the oral arguments was going to support the intense deliberation that was going to accompany every decision-making process that we have, and especially in the most controversial cases. You already have a flavor. Perhaps you can imagine what happens, and they can be very intense, when we justices in the court are closeted within our session conference room. I have also asked the PIO to really design a website that will transmit as much information to the public as possible, including understandable and responsive financial reports. COA reports, etc., those are there. In fact, the members of the House Appropriation Committee were quite surprised last August 15, when we had our presentation before the Appropriations Committee. where they saw for the first time that we were going to even tell the entire public what we had been doing with the JDF, the Judiciary Development Fund, how we were distributing the 80% COLA portion to the employees on a monthly basis, how fast it was, and that we were really keeping within the statutory limitation of only keeping 20% for capital outlay and equipment purchases. Those are things that I believe the public should be assured the judiciary has no reason to withhold from it. As the institution that is imbued with the constitutional duty of upholding the rule of law, the transparency policy is in keeping with our desire to assure the public that over time we hope to build a judiciary that you can be truly proud of. Due to the relentless effort also of Professor Te and his team, you can see that they have been issuing quick summaries to you. And I hope that you understand that when they do that, the intense labor that goes into trying to digest very complicated legal questions into those short paragraphs took some time and a lot of effort. We lawyers can tolerate lengthy sentences and lengthy argumentations, but the rest of the public cannot. So this, together with the public coverage of our events, including the live interview of JBC applicants to the most important positions in the country. And the next most important interview will be the interview for the overall Deputy Ombudsman this next week. I'm sorry, no, in the next few weeks. I'll have to check on the date for that. This is important to me as a leader of the institution because I have to always live with the constant reminder that the judiciary itself is constrained in many ways. There are things it cannot do much about. The first is the logistical requirement to support its operations. We basically have no power to dictate how much support is going to be given to the judiciary. So what we need is for the public to understand what we are here for, how important we are to democracy, how we can more efficiently deliver the rendition of justice to the public, and why it is important for the public to communicate to both the executive department and the legislative department that, considering the gargantuan budget availability anyway, could you not increase the budget of 1% or even under 1% that Congress had been allocating the judiciary historically? Imagine the third great branch of government being historically treated budget-wise that way. It is important to make the public understand, for example, that we don't largely have control over the building of our courthouses. We don't have in our budget capital outlay allocations historically for the building of courthouses. Allocations for our court buildings are either given to the Department of Justice, who turns over those courthouses to us when they are finished, or by the local government units. We only have a few houses or buildings that we can actually call our own. So if we are going to strengthen independence of the judiciary, you have to imagine that we must be able to control the kind of physical infrastructure that will house our judges. It is in keeping with our desire to give our public a sense of dignity when they try to seek justice from our courtrooms. How can the public believe that justice will be rendered if our courthouses are dilapidated and they see the judges working under such dire conditions? We also want to communicate to the public the judiciary's serious desire to cut down the backlog of cases at all levels in the court. Allow me. Right now, under the most simple baselining that we have done, we have more than 600,000 cases for lower level courts spread out over roughly 2,200 courts. From a theoretical point of view, that workload should have been manageable because it just would amount to about 300 cases per judge. But that is not the distribution pattern. You have courts that have as little as 10, 30 cases. And you have courts that have caseloads that are as high as 5,000 cases. Even the most efficient and able judge, who has only at most 13 personnel to help her, cannot possibly push the wheels of justice to grind faster so that it can result in a significant reduction of the litigation time involved. So that is one. I will have to tell the public that there is a distribution problem, there is a case-carrying capacity problem that is present. And this fact had not been examined for over a long period of time. Judges are lacking in the most congested cities with the heaviest caseloads because the determination of what number of judges to appoint to which particular salas is a legislative function. We do not have a say on that. In countries like Singapore and Malaysia, you have the Chief Justice and the Supreme Court deciding when to create courts and where to allocate them. We don't have that kind of statutory flexibility. And even if we have the limited power to make temporary designations by assigning more judges to the court, as you have seen, for example, in the Maguindanao massacre cases, we had already relieved Judge Jocelyn Reyes of his caseload and assigned assisting judges to her. But she still has to work with the same personnel complement, 13 persons, to handle all these cases. And mind you, this is a one-of-a-kind case where you have hundreds of suspects and nearly 100 accused and more than 100 witnesses presented so far. So this is the kind of systems problem that require a detailed inventory taking and analysis of the data. And this is part of my goal of making transparent to the public even the data that are available to us. If you had read the message in the annual report, I had already communicated a sense of dissatisfaction with the data that is existing within our institution. What I want us to start with is clean, clear, and reliable data. That is why I'm very grateful for the support I'm getting for the Justicia Decongestion Project, where for the first time, from the filing of the case all the way up to its termination, we are plotting the milestones and the number of days it takes for every particular step to take place. That way, our diagnostics of what ails the judicial system can really be evident, can really be based on hard evidence. We are not going to anymore just rely on theories to re-engineer the process of justice. The process of re-engineering also requires that I coordinate very closely with the two most important partners for the criminal justice system, apart from the Ombudsman, and these are the Secretary of Justice and the Secretary of Interior and Local Government. We had convened the Justice Sector Coordinating Council. And for the first time, I was able to inform the Secretary of Justice that the number one reason for the dismissal of criminal cases in the lower courts when they are related to drugs is the non-appearance of witnesses, especially police witnesses. You cannot have detention prisoners remaining in detention cells for years on end waiting for the process to allow their cases to be accommodated and heard, and only for those cases to again be reset simply because of the absence of these police witnesses. So Secretary Rojas and I and the PNP agreed that when we serve these subpoenas to the police witnesses, to a central recipient that is equivalent to a service by the police witnesses themselves, to the extent that it is administratively possible to do so. The reason is clear why it has to be done and why we have to have a radical approach. You look at our detention cells nationwide, and I have visited prisons. I've gone to the provincial jail of Cebu City. I have spoken with the dancing inmates. And after they made a presentation, a very spirited presentation before the Chief Justice, I went down among them and physically touching them, saying, I am here basically to find out how we can help speed up the resolution of your cases. You cannot understand the sense of irony I felt and the sadness that was there when, after dancing to very energetic modern beats, you would see these prisoners crying simply because they feel that a system should not be designed or should not be tolerated where their hearings get reset only every 4 months at the earliest, or even 6 months. That is something that is not tolerable. So the clear message is, it is no longer business as usual. We have been racking our brains to find ways to shorten litigation time. You would already have noted the rule on the efficient use of paper that we released during the last quarter of 2012 and followed by the judicial affidavit rule. Those twin measures are intended to not only save the environment through the efficient use of paper rule, but they are also intended to cut down litigation time by at least 20%. Because by way of the affidavits, the consolidation of all the witness testimonies, together with the documents attachment, that will already do away with the usual question and answer format that you have witnessed even during the most publicized coverages of famous trials, as in what happened in the Senate the last year. What we want to emphasize is that there is a systems problem that needs to be addressed. And that requires a lot of time and attention and a framework for managing an institution that is already 30,000 strong. Now, the JBC, for example, is re-engineering even its processes because for the first time it is thinking seriously about going out in the field and looking for the best and the brightest to populate the judge population. No longer will it just be a passive acceptor of applications. Rather, the question that we always have to deal with is, how can we get the best to join the judiciary? And why do we need the best? We need the best because, as I committed during my IBP speech when I was still one of the candidates for the position of Chief Justice, the reason why we need to get the best is that we have to produce a generation of men and women who are willing to be set apart, to live a semi-monastic life, a life that is divorced from many of the social, political, and financial complications that attend the lives of most people, but who would rather focus on the job at hand, and knowing that every misconduct and every misstep can lead to the prolonged and unjust detention of a prisoner, or not allowing a family to be released from the agony of protracted litigation. At the end of the day, any efficiency steps we make is all about the human individual and the people he cares about. We are helping people We are helping lives to be rebuilt. We are helping families to go on and rise from the morass of the problems that accompany any legal entanglement. This is why also I have made a call to the Integrated Bar of the Philippines and the legal academia in order for us to continually re-examine even the way we are getting lawyers into the system. Are we teaching our lawyers the correct values? What are we teaching particular subjects for? What are the messages that we are telling them about? What are the values that we are communicating? And I had even ventured further by asking the academe to think about the 70% to 80% every year who do not make the grade and are not able to pass the bar exams. Whether the approach is thinking about the 70% or 80% who are left out of the system. Whether it is trying to expedite the case before a judge. Ultimately, the question is, why do we serve? We serve because of our enduring respect for the value of human dignity. Ultimately, it is all about that. Being the Chief Justice is not about power, it is about rendering justice, it is about paying respect to those values that we hold dear as Filipinos. That is why I consider this position as a position of trust more than anything. And that is why I ventured to talk to you today. Perhaps you can help carry a message for us. And we want to become partners with you, and we want the public to own a stake in the improvement of the judicial system. No longer should the judicial system be enshrouded in myths and speculation and intrigue. Let us look at it as a system that tries to find out what is just and fair in the arena of human conflict. If we can try to devise a process that will allow those issues to be resolved, then I think we are on the march to progress as a country. And so I'm here, and I'm ready to answer your questions. And please accept the deepest gratitude from my heart on behalf of the entire judiciary. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chief Justice. Now we shall proceed to the questions of our panel, but before I introduce the panel, we are live on several networks. You're also on live stream by way of Rappler.com. Please join the conversation by tweeting in your questions to the SCPIO Twitter account at SCPH_PIO using the hashtag AskCJ. Let me now introduce our panelists. From TV5, Ms. Lucy Cruz Valdez. From Rappler, Ms. Maria Ressa. From GMA Network, Mr. Howie Severino. From ABS-CBN, Ms. Linda Humilia. From the Philippine Star, Mr. Edu Punay. From UNTV, Attorney Reggie Tongol. From Net25, Ms. Donna Cueto. From the Philippine Daily Inquirer, Ms. Cristina Bendaño. From ABS-CBN, Ms. Ina Reformina. From Solar TV, Mr. Anjo Alimario. From the Philippine Daily Inquirer, Ms. Tech Torres. From Business World, Mr. Michael Flores. From TV5, Attorney Mel Santa Maria. And from GMA Network, Ms. Leah Manialac del Castillo. We have agreed previously that the panelists will have one question and one follow-up. If we have enough time, we will probably take some questions at random, but we will also be putting in your questions through social media through the hashtag AskCJ. But in order to start us off, the first question will be asked from our hosts from the De La Salle University College of Law. We'd like to welcome the Dean of the College of Law, Dean Jose Manuel Diokno, to ask his question and his follow-up of the Chief Justice. Dean Diokno.
Thank you, Attorney Te. Good afternoon, Your Honor. First, may I just say that for a long time, from my point of view, the judiciary has been sort of in the dark. And we welcome the light that has been shining on the judiciary now. We welcome the more open transparency and accountability that your administration has brought to the courts. One of the biggest stumbling blocks, I believe, to your sitting in the court is the issue of accountability of judges. And my question really pertains to that matter of accountability. Basically, my question is, how do you intend to address this issue of accountability of judges in light of the fact that we have an existing Supreme Court decision, the Maceda versus Vasquez case, which says that the ombudsman cannot investigate or prosecute judges unless and until they have been administratively investigated by the court. Considering that we have that decision and until it is modified, we will have to live with it, one of the questions in my mind is how does the court intend to address and improve on the image of accountability of judges?
Thank you, Dean Diokno. That is actually a question I am presently grappling with. Now, I saw that the budget of the judiciary does not contain any confidential or intelligence fund. And when I thought about how a hard investigation, not a paper-based investigation, can be genuinely commenced in the court, I had to face the question of whether the judiciary is the best institution to undertake that, or we should rather delegate it, or refer it, or endorse it to bodies that are specially set up to conduct investigations that will allow things like investigation of bank accounts, surveillance, even the conduct of entrapment operations. We don't have the kind of anti-fraud units that robust anti-corruption programs usually have. So, I am faced now with the dilemma of whether to propose to the NBank the creation of such a unit within the court, but that will carry with it its own complications. Because to run an investigating arm, a hard-nosed investigating arm, is different from our core competencies, which is really adjudication. The other is to arrive at an agreement, either with the Ombudsman or with the Department of Justice, by creating a special unit within the National Bureau of Investigation that will investigate judges. Because our experience is that, and Justice Lagman is here to attest to it, which is now the highest ranking member of the regular members of the JBC, of the Executive Committee of the JBC. Our requests for investigation do not get prioritized in the National Bureau of Investigation. And we cannot blame them if they do not prioritize a request, for example, for them to investigate claims made by applicants to judicial positions. They have a lot more things to investigate. But if we can reach an agreement with either of these two bodies for them to do it in a way that will allow us to really run after allegations of corruption for them and then submit it to us in our adjudicative capacities already as part of our disciplinary process, maybe that would work. I was discussing with the Chief Justice of Singapore earlier because I had just come from the first meeting of the ASEAN Chief Justices, and they were saying that the investigations into judicial misconduct that is apart from adjudication is done by a centralized government agency specifically tasked to run after corruption. Now, that idea either will require a lot of discussion with my colleagues in the NBank, but be assured that I want evidence-based investigations and adjudication of administrative complaints against judges to really commence. Why? It is not healthy for a judiciary to have floating accounts or stories about corruption when I don't get any affidavit before me that says that I witnessed firsthand that Judge X received Y amount of money. That is not the kind of affidavits that you see in our administrative investigative processes. But that is the kind of evidence that will send a chilling effect, in fact, an inhibitive effect on those who are trying to believe, or those who are starting to believe, that they can gain money from the system. We sorely need that. We need to find a solution. And you can be assured, I'm thinking about it, and if you can help me together with the rest of the legal academe to create a path acceptable to the judiciary, because it is fully respective of its independence as a third branch, we are more than willing to listen to how we can solve that. And I thank you, because that is an important concern. And we cannot prove our mettle until we are able to discipline our judges correctly. But Dean Jokno, if you might have noticed, we have been really running after erring judges and members of the bar recently. And you could see that in the recent decisions we have been issuing. We intend to crack down really on the wayward ones.
Thank you, ma'am. Dean Diokno, your follow-up.
That you have our full support from the De La Salle University.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean. The next one to ask a question will be Ms. Lucy Cruz Valdez of TV5.
Good afternoon, Madam CJ. First of all, we want to thank you for this press conference, because it is obviously a departure from your earlier dignified silence policy when you assumed office. My first question, because I'm not sure if there's going to be a second round, I'm going to go straight to the point. The hottest issue right now, of course, is the debate over the abolition of the pork barrel. I would like to ask you where you stand on that, but that might not be fair. So I will have to ask you how you think the judiciary will probably handle it if the whole issue ends up in a clash between the executive and the legislature. And considering that you yourself have some discretionary funds through the JDF, of course, I also know how little that is. And in fact, you're appealing to the public to help you appeal to the legislature, who has the power of the purse, to give you even just 1% increase in your budget. But how do you stand on this issue?
Before that, I will request one of my key lawyers, Attorney Adan, to please give me the absolute figure for the JDF 20% component, which Ms. Valdez has characterized as discretionary. If you can find that for me, we can go back to that figure later on. But first, well, it is your personal take that it is a departure from my dignified silence policy. I don't see it as a departure, actually. This is a prefatory statement, no? In response to your real question. So you really know how to bait me into answering more than just one question. You're really good. Okay, you're really good. Okay. Because we're not discussing politics, because we're not going to discuss socially controversial issues, and because we are not going to discuss ongoing cases, this is still compatible with dignified silence, which allows us to respond to your question on PDAF when the case is finally brought before us and when we speak through our decisions. And that is my response.
Okay, I'm entitled to a second
Follow-up,
question.
yes.
Okay, this has nothing to do with pork barrel. But in view of the discontent you seem to have expressed over your very, very scarce resources, I would like to ask you on your position on what they call judicial legislation or judicial activism. Because of the discontent over the two branches of government, may I ask you what your position is on where the Sereno Court should go? We have heard of the writ of amparo and the writ of kalikasan. and a guideline over staying the hand of judges in regard to imprisonment as a sanction for libel cases, which some say are all judicial legislation acts. Where do you stand on that?
The judiciary is not a static an institution as people might be tempted to think. Please remember that the Constitution itself is a very dynamic living organism. In the same way that the judiciary also fleshes out its life in different degrees of energy. And you had used the term judicial activism, perhaps to describe a more energetic and a more unafraid judiciary. That is a product of history. And I am not here to stem the tide of history for the sake of just trying to reverse a trend. But what I believe a wise and prudent Chief Justice should do is trim the outlying hedges to solidify the center and give it a more solid lock-in step rhythm. In other words, not too many surprises, not too many upsets, but all upholding the core fundamental values that you yourself can read from the Constitution. And if you read the Constitution, this is my take on it, it gives so much primacy to the value of the human individual, to his dignity, to his aspirations to grow, so that when you see a deficiency in the democratic space, because it has been created by a political elite structure, and there is a judicial remedy to step into that democratic space, and it is not unwarranted under the Constitution, then maybe that is the Filipinos' view of what a huwes should be. Sino ba dapat ang huwes? Hindi ba siya yung tutulong sa amin kung kinakailangan tulungan kasi nangangampos ang karapatan na ibinibigay sa amin ng ibang sangay ng gobyerno? Maaring yun eh. So I'm not proposing any radical reversal, but I'm proposing a graduated and constant review of where we are flowing with the stream of Philippine history.
So it's gradual judicial activism.
Review, a gradual review.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Lucy. So the next one to ask
Thank
her
you.
question, Ms. Maria Ressa from Rappler.
Hi, Maria.
Thank you so much for doing this. I agree with Lucci in the sense it's unprecedented for us to hear your thoughts undiluted. I guess it is never easy to reform one organization, let alone an entire judiciary. You are the youngest in the Supreme Court. You're also the first female Chief Justice. Now, like Lucci, I'll toss two questions into my one. What is the biggest problem you have had to deal with to push through what you want? And then, in addition to that, you are also coming in as the Supreme Court Chief Justice at the time where technology is overtaking everything. So let me ask first the first question about you as Maria Lourdes Sereno, the Chief Justice, the youngest in the court, and the only woman leading this court.
The youngest Chief Justice, if I'm not mistaken, Teddy can correct me, is Chief Justice Moran.
Moran.
Okay,
Yes,
I'm
sorry.
the second youngest. But if you are going to consider that this era is the modern era, then I'm the youngest modern era Chief Justice. And I happen to be female. And loaded in the description of my gender is a history of looking at the female as loaded with so many obstacles and burdens. Actually, because my life has evolved in a way that I had to surmount one obstacle after another, I was never surprised by the amount of debris, obstacles that would present themselves along the way. After all, Maria, this is a 112-year-old institution that has never had the kind of spring cleaning that all institutions should normally have periodically. So if you haven't had that kind of reassessment, diagnostics, setting out the parameters, setting the scales again, you can just imagine the kind of work. And this is where the advantage of being a female who has had to multitask and who virtually has 10 hands doing things at the same time has afforded me. It is natural for me to multitask. It is natural. It is not strange for obstacles to come my way. But when you come to the question of the biggest obstacle, this is where I really need wisdom in. I have 18 years, and I have to deal with traditions in a 112-year-old bureaucracy. The expectations of our people rise exponentially as their exposure to other cultures that are more efficient and to the opening of alternatives of freedom that they are seeing before their eyes are rising. So, am I able to predict the level of expectations of our people in a way that we can be seen as sufficiently keeping in step with our bounden duty to reform and transform ourselves into an institution that can respond to those expectations? When do I say that people's expectations are already impossible, too much? When am I pushing myself too hard? When am I becoming too impatient? On my plate are several programs of action being done at the same time. I have a mind map that is comprehended in 4 pillars of reform with tentacles and branches from across the 4 pillars and all interlocking with each other. How do you try to run reform for a system where what I do with one affects the other? When am I correct in prioritizing one reform item over that of another? I have already identified to you my sense that one of the main things that I should attend to is shortening the period of detention for detention prisoners, because anyway, they have a 20% conviction rate. So effectively, you are unjust to the extent that 80% of them are suffering undue detention in our detention cells. By any measure, that cannot be tolerated. So that is a clear priority for me. But there are others. The condition of our courthouses, the upgrading of the skills of our personnel, the manualization of our procedures, the teaching, the modernization of law school's outlook, and reform of the bar exams. What is to be prioritized? And I guess it also can be characterized as a common disease among women who want to accomplish everything all at the same time. I guess we have to make a choice, and we live and fall on whether our choice has been correct. I hope I am not wrong in the way I am prioritizing things. I hope also that I will be given the grace to really run these things in a way that is not also harmful to myself as a person. And we know how women can be too hard on themselves. That is something that you yourselves have commonly experienced. So that is the prism from which I cope with my day-to-day life.
Ma'am, if you don't mind, when you do this, when you're trying to reform a system, obviously people will be disenfranchised. And we're talking in a country with the most endemic corruption, among one of the highest. I guess, is there an instance that you can give us where you've had to deal when you try to change the system will fight back.
Okay.
Something specific.
No, this is what I do. I know that there are soft points for access by the reform measures that I'm going to undertake. First, my philosophy is that the reform measures must be generated by the internal stakeholders themselves. I am very keen about the process. That is why we have the process mapping programs that are going on that are internally driven, not externally funded, mind you, where our personnel are really defining for themselves right now their various roles, and they are now doing a job audit and drawing up their own terms of reference. That had not been done before. Now, you give them a sense of ownership, and you tell them it is good for you to reform. Just imagine a public that appreciates what you do, that the public that says what you are given in terms of compensation and benefits, you deserve, because you serve with all sincerity and with all efficiency. And when I tell them that they can therefore hold themselves up high, and there will be a future for us when we can say that the judiciary is setting the gold standard for public service, then you can see the wellspring of hope and the drawing out of enough energy for them to be with me, with us, the collective leadership of the court in this reform path. Where is the point of resistance? Amazingly, technology has disabused the minds of people that things cannot be done. There seems to be the idea that technology is enabling things to move faster, so probably we can do things faster as well. I have already warned everyone, especially during the electronic courts presentation in Quezon City, where I said that the usage for information technology will remove intermediation of human brokers from the system, so that will allow us, Maria, to really focus on the points where, despite all the transparency measures, there will be secret deals in the future. And that you cannot stop unless you have the anti-corruption hard investigation being conducted by seasoned people, as Dean Jokno was proposing we set up. I am not yet at that point. At this point, what I have had is cooperation, because there is still belief that the stakeholders can own reform. There is still the belief that there is a lot of room for improvement. Now, if this is the end of the spectrum from which I am coming, and I will only get to the point of really dealing with the hard problems a bit later, I will tell you what happens then.
Thank you, Maria. Howie Severino from GMA Network.
Yeah, ma'am. I want to
Howie.
reiterate what the others said by thanking you for this unique opportunity.
Thank you, Howie.
Yeah, I want to ask about faith, because I know that you're a deeply spiritual person. And I just recall one of the first statements that you made as Chief Justice in public to the Supreme Court employees, I think at a flag-raising ceremony. You said, in translation, basically, the whole world is witness that this appointment is God's will. Only God put me in this position. So my question is, after a year as Chief Justice, of all the things that have happened in the court, what else would you attribute to God's will? Or put another way, how do you reconcile your religious beliefs with your role as the primary guardian of our Constitution?
Siguro, if you don't mind, Howie, tatagalugin ko ito. Okay, na? Kasi mas tarok mas naiintindihan ng kapwa Pilipino natin ito. May paniniwala na pag ikaw ay naniniwala ng gusto sa Diyos, hindi ka pwedeng matalino. At hindi pa ka pwedeng hard-nosed, hindi ka pwedeng strategic, hindi ka pwedeng cunning, hindi ka pwedeng smart. Okay? Pero anong ginawa ko nung panahon na yun, Howie? Nung sinabi ko sa mga empleyado na galing sa Panginoon ito. Siyempre, unang-una, nung sinabihan ako ni Presidente Aquino, pinasalamatan ko na siya noon So hindi ko na siya kailangang pasalamatan ulit sa harapan ng mga empleyado namin. Ano ang kaibahan ng pagbigay ng karangalan sa Diyos sa pagbibigay ko ng karangalan at pagpapasalamat kay Pangulong Aquino sa ginawa niyang desisyon? If man can glorify man, can give thanks to man, or even to himself, how different is that if I do not give the glory to myself or to any man, but recognize God's centrality in all of these things? And this is not incompatible with my role as the chief guardian of the Constitution. Why? You read the preamble. We, the Filipino people, imploring the aid of Almighty God, ask for these ideals of democracy to flourish for prosperity and posterity. And if you believe that God is the author of intelligence, how can a deeply spiritual person at the same time be unintelligent because she believes in God? It is part of the tradition, for example, of Western Christianity, of Judeo-Christian traditions, that the most important universities in the world were put up by Christian, by pastors, by priests, that the greatest intellectuals were also theologians. Hindi incompatible ito eh. So, wala akong nakikita eh. Kasi, naiintindihan ko rin that it is part of my duty to be very respectful of the Constitution. In other words, I do not bring the Bible to my chamber, flip it open, and point to a verse as the answer when I'm making a decision. No. No. I had 4 years of training in law school to bank on, and my long years of experience as a lawyer and as a teacher of law. To do that, we have traditions. We have tools of reasoning. Only those legal analytical tools are allowed us. So I cannot quote the Bible and use that as the basis for my decisions. So there is a way for someone who believes in an immanent presence to try to serve humanity, to serve his fellow human being, not because it is part of self-glorification, but it is his duty to his divine maker. And it is a perfectly intelligent, rational decision to do so.
Follow up, Howie?
Yeah, that was quite clear. Thank you. I'll ask something much more mundane. No, when you were among the candidates for this job, you were among the more junior. And when you were appointed, it raised not a few eyebrows. And I hear even among your colleagues in the court. And I just wanted to ask you, how is your relationship with the other justices? And has your relationship with them changed since you became Chief Justice? Because, of course, you were a justice before you became Chief Justice.
Okay. I knew you were going to ask that. So, there need not be a howl from you. You see, what I see right now are good working professional relationships. My proof. Since I sat as Chief Justice, I have presided over every en banc session, not a single one of which has been canceled because of undue absence, and not a single item of which has been skipped because of serious objections. The agenda items cover more than 5,000 plus agenda items over the course of these 12 months. For the first division, of which I am a member, we have covered more than 13,000 agenda items. I can tell you, if our working relationships are not good, how were we able to pass the efficient use of paper rule in a fast period of time, from the moment it was proposed to the moment it was unanimously approved. What about the judicial affidavit rule? And I have heard that the prosecutors are already withdrawing all their objections to the judicial affidavit rule. We just passed yesterday, and I'm sorry, you did not pick it up. Teddy was telling you how historic yesterday was because we just approved the rules on financial rehabilitation. And we are now in the second phase where we are going to review the rules on insolvency. And on September 3, the members of the Civil Code Revision Committee, made up of more than 100 people, Dinjok, no? From across the country, academicians, practitioners, judges, are going to go to the session hall of the Supreme Court to present their work of 4.5 months, I guess, or 6 months, and present it to the court for possible approval. 3 weeks ago, 2 justices from the Sandigan Bayan made a presentation to us of the proposed revised internal rules of the Sandigan Bayan, where they are proposing many of the motions for delay are going to be prohibited. That on top of 13,000 agenda items. If our relationship with each other, professional, is not good, how could we have achieved such historic landmarks? How could I have convinced them to expedite approval of the electronic court piloting in Quezon City, and then the Justicia Decongestion Program, which is right now receiving so much intense attraction from our internal stakeholders? How could I have even discussed with them the future of a possible Supreme Court building if we are not able to work with each other? In other words, I had earlier been discussing about the need to demythify and to de-intriguize, if there is such a word, discussions on the Supreme Court. Such a amount of work that had been going on could not have been done if the justices of the Supreme Court had been devoting their time to destructive activities. You have a very constructive and a very hardworking Supreme Court. And even the case congestion, even our court dockets are being drastically reduced. An attention that has been receiving top priority from us. And look at the election cases that we have had. We prioritize them immediately. In October, I issued a Dear Colleagues letter. I asked them, please, can you kindly finish all the election cases before May 2013 comes around? And you know what they did? They all responded. So the drafts of the decisions all came. And except for 1 or 2, we basically have cleared all pre-2013 contests of our plates. So that is the data that I have, Howie, to answer you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next to us will be Linda Humilia of ABS-CBN.
Good afternoon, Madam Chief Justice. And thank you for this opportunity. I'm tempted to ask which Chief Justice would flip open the Bible and randomly point at a verse to base his decision on, but it's fun to keep everyone guessing. So I'll ask another question. And congratulations on your first year in office. We do know that you were appointed in August also of last year, and part of the reason you're there, among other things, of course, are qualifications, but also because your predecessor was removed from office. And said predecessor was just interviewed the other day, saying that his impeachment, removal from as Chief Justice, was an assault on the judiciary, on the Supreme Court, on the independence of the court. May I ask what, for you, is the effect of the impeachment trial last year on the judiciary in general and the Supreme Court in particular? And would you say that, as you said earlier, this is the spring cleaning in a 112-year institution, or that the 112-year institution badly needs?
You can judge, or you can sense the opinion that I have had on the impeachment. In response to the question of whether I volunteered to testify as being called upon by members of the impeachment prosecution team and even by some impeachment judges themselves. What is all important for me is that I must not involve myself in a political process that will weaken the institution of the judiciary. Because we may have transient political events happening, but the only way that our democracy can be stable, regardless of whether we will have another people power movement or not, and regardless of how many people will march again on the streets, if I stick to the solid rock that the judiciary must be. So, what has been the impact of the impeachment on the judiciary? I think you could objectively see that the Supreme Court respected the process. I don't think at any one time you could say that the Supreme Court disrespected the process. The impact on me personally of the impeachment is, as history would go, I never thought I would be the replacement, but I'm here. But the impact on me also of the impeachment is the deep realization that everyone can at any time be made to render an account. And I cannot take anything for granted. That's why when I do things, even in the privacy of my chambers, I imagine that the whole world is watching me so that I can render an account of my actuations and my decisions at any time. That is the clear message to me of the impeachment trial.
And just as a follow-up question, again, on your first year in office, you know, when you were appointed, there was a trend, and people learned that you're going to be there for 18 years, which is very mind-boggling to a lot of people. There was a trending topic on Twitter that says, #CJ pa si Sereno, and everybody just added, you know, like, gumraduate na ako sa college, CJ pa si Sereno, nakarating na tayo sa Mars, CJ pa si Sereno, and all that. Alluding to the fact that you'll be there for quite a long time. Do you see yourself staying on for 18 years? And what do you think would be your best legacy after you end your term?
Do I see myself? I cannot predict the future. So what I can assure you, however, is I'm not going to resign simply because I made an oath. And that oath requires me to faithfully discharge my duties to the best of my ability until objective conditions prevent me from discharging that, as in the case of an illness that may prove fatal or not when I need to really live. Now, referring back to the discussion that I had with the Chief Justice of Singapore, he's only 51. And he was appointed at the age of 50, and he will stay in office until the age of 65, renewable for another 5 years. And even perhaps, even after 5 years, for circumstances that the Prime Minister may decide require him to stay there. So, I am not really too much of an international oddity. You have the Chief Justices of the Supreme Court serving way, way past into their 80s. The Chief Justice of Singapore who will serve at the very least for 15 years. Now, the advantage of a long term is that I'm able to dig into the problems in a deeper way. Assume, for example, that I had only a few years in office. I cannot do the very detailed diagnostics that I'm doing right now because I won't have the luxury of time. I will be tempted to think of legacies and perhaps even of retirement ceremonies. But to think of the hard questions and to excavate so that the sores are exposed and the ills examined. A short-term Chief Justice might be afraid of doing that. I'm not afraid of doing that. I'm not even afraid of having conversations with people, including the public, on the difficulties that we are facing. The mindset of a short-term Chief Justice will be very different. Now, as to what my legacy will be, I just want to do my job well. I just want to do what is right. And I think it will be the job of historians and analysts like you to tell me what my legacy has been when I leave.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you, Linda. The next one to ask a question will be Attorney J.J. Atienza of PTV4.
If it pleases the Honorable Chief Justice,
Attorney.
I would just like to thank you for this opportunity and for mere mortal lawyers like us. Man, I'm great. No, really, Chief Justice, this is a very, very once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be able to ask the Chief Justice herself of questions that are dear to our hearts. So I would be asking you two questions and maybe insert little ones, paragraphs A or something. So the first question would be, with the reforms of the government towards that pushes on inclusive growth,
Yeah.
I would like to think that the Supreme Court also has inclusive justice in mind. How do you plan to keep in step with these reforms to make the ordinary Filipino people, particularly the poor, to understand about the judiciary's reforms? How can you make them truly feel that justice is indeed accessible to them?
Okay. The more than 90% of our detention prisoners are there because they are poor, meaning they cannot post bail. And some of them are there because they have violated the Dangerous Drugs Act, many offenses of which are non-bailable. We are presently studying, and this is another proposal that is right now before us, on the rules to decongest jails of detention prisoners. Just imagine the kind of impact this will have. If the message that we are sending is they do not deserve to be in jail simply because they are poor, considering that they have not yet been convicted. I don't know. Is that something that can resonate with the poor? I'm not an expert at communication, but if you can help tell us that when we put priority on decongesting jails, it is actually because we want to address that economic divide that prevents the poor from being free while giving a leg up a person who has the money to post bail. So that one. Now, we also have the small claims court. Right now, we are trying to look at increasing the jurisdiction of small claims courts. We are also looking at whether we can have a call center for people who want to understand the small claims courts. Because the costs, we are trying to bring down the cost related to filing claims before the small claims courts to only 1,000 pesos. In other words, kung konti lang naman ang pinagkautangan yung magkaibigan, dapat 1,000 lang ang cost sa'yo, pag-file ng affidavit mo, tapos mabilisan lang ang judgment. Pinag-iisipan ko rin, and the judicial affidavit rule will allow that, to find a way to help the OFWs make use of the small claims courts. Is it not true that many of OFWs are usually the ones who are being asked to lend money to their kamag-anaks or friends for a small business here and there, and sometimes the investment disappears? It is... if we are able to make our courts more electronic, and if people can have access to courts by a publicly accessible system that even the poor can make use of, we are going to narrow the gap between those who can afford to hire high-priced lawyers in Makati, who can afford high appearance fees, and those who are being represented by POW lawyers or even IBP legal aid services. That will be a gradual narrowing down. So, I am not a communications expert. So to make the poor feel that they are part of this program to make justice accessible is something you have to help me with. You have to help us with. And Teddy, of course, is our expert on the matter.
Second question, Your
Follow-up.
Honor. Of course, PTV will be there to help the judiciary
Thank you.
in disseminating this information. The second question, Madam Chief Justice, is what is your take on the MCQ type of questions in the bar examinations, considering that it is one of the reforms that you mentioned earlier regarding the bar examinations? Does MCQ increase the percentage of bar passers? But at the same time, will adopting the MCQ type or adhering to it, continuing to adhere to it, will it not affect the quality of lawyers that we have? Vis-a-vis, of course, the increasing number of vacancies in the judiciary that we have to fill.
Okay. Now, I did not talk about the MCQ as part of my reform. I was speaking about reforming the bar examinations in general. Why did I not make particular mention of the MCQ? Because the court is divided in its opinion on the best methodology. Everything is under review right now. You had an examination that was spearheaded by Justice Abad, then by Justice Villarama, then by Justice Brion, who is the chairman of these October bar exams. We are still looking at the data on which form of bar examination is best suited to allow us to get the high quality professionals that should be allowed to practice law. Now, Dean Jokno here is part of the pool of surveyees who told us that for this year's examination, they want less of the MCQ type of examinations. And in keeping with that professed wish, we have lessened the participation of MCQ questions in the variables that we are going to consider in the bar examinations. My personal view, if that is what you're going to ask me, of the MCQ is that it has succeeded in some jurisdictions in allowing a fast turnaround between examination and the production of the results of that examination. So that short period of time is quite an efficiency achievement. On the other hand, there is not a complete subscription to that idea that that turnaround time is by itself a good that should be sought apart from finding out the deeper qualities that will make for a good lawyer or not. I have to still read studies by the law deans, and I have to evaluate this question again when Justice Brion reports to us after the bar examinations are over on his assessment of the approach of a mixed type exam, but which has a heavier emphasis on the essay type questions. It is something I can report to you eventually, I can communicate to you eventually, but at this point, we're still studying the data.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, JJ. We go to the second of four lawyers on the panel, Attorney Reggie Tongol.
Hello. Good afternoon, ma'am. Ma'am, thank you for this opportunity again. And we would like to inform everyone that, and especially you, that UNTV is carrying this event live now.
Thank you.
On TV, in free TV, UNTV 37, and in our live webcast. Ma'am, I would just like to know, in the past year of being the Chief Justice, what is your biggest error, if any, and what did you do to rectify it? I know it's a beauty contest question, but I think to make it different, we just want to pick your brain on that. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Error. I don't know if Chief Justices admit to errors. That's what that is the difficulty I'm grappling with. I'm trying to look at the past Chief Justices in the United States and in the Philippines, and I'm trying to find if there is any lesson I can draw from any admission that they may have ever made. And what will be the legal implication on the stability
Not about
of jurisprudence
not about any cases.
for a Chief Justice to admit to an error?
Yes.
That's why the Supreme Court does not also apologize, even if it has made mistakes. It reconsiders, it reviews. But I have to remember a phrase that says the Supreme Court admits that it has made an error. Reggie, this is what I will do, because I do not want to depart too much from the tradition of Chief Justices not admitting to errors. I will tell you about lessons. Is that fair? Okay, lessons. One lesson that I found very important is that I cannot presume that documents alone speak the entirety of the context of a previous decision before I came into the court. In other words, when I was reviewing many administrative resolutions in the court and many past traditions, I did not understand that even if there was a resolution, that there was so much baggage attending that decision that I would be asked to carry. In other words, even if I were not a participant in a previous decision, the problems of that previous decision will be my problem. Okay, so what I do now is I conduct a background investigation as to why the court made this step. Presuming that every resolution of all previous courts were all done in good faith and after due deliberation, I believe them. And I had every right to believe them. And I saw the law, and there was enough authority. I saw that everything was fine. But now I realize that history can sometimes pop out of the blue and tell you, you are going to be made accountable for something you had no participation in. And simply because I am the leader of that institution, that is a reality I have to live with.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Follow up, Reggie.
For my follow-up question, I would like to know, ma'am, in the past year of being the Chief Justice, I know you've been asked a lot of questions already from lawyers, from forums that you attend, about all types of questions. If there's one question that you are expecting to be asked and would like to be asked, what is that question? And what's your answer to that question?
Now, the fora I visit, I attend, Reggie, are made up of different people. And I don't think there is just one common question, okay? For example, let me give you a snapshot of my different visits. When I went to the Lawag Provincial Court, it had suffered a fire a few years back. The rooftop was leaking. I'm sorry, of animal urine. The records were dilapidated. And the problem and the question that was asked whenever I go to courthouses that look like that is, when will the judiciary have its own courthouse? Or, when can I request the provincial government of Lawag, of Ilocos Norte, to please repair that courthouse? Because that is owned by the provincial government of Ilocos Norte, and the judiciary is not authorized to spend for the renovation of that courthouse. That is when I go to dilapidated courthouses. When I meet sheriffs, they ask me, when can we expect our ranks to be professionalized, our salary grades to be improved, and for us not to be treated the way we had been treated via live television. And I think you know the incident I am referring to. When will they be treated with more respect and dignity? In other words, when can I talk with other branches of government to really fully recognize the authority of sheriffs when they're executing court orders? When I talk to clerks of court, when will they have an inside track to a judiciary position? When I talk to legal researchers, when can we have an upgrade of our salary grade level so that we can be somehow comparable to the court attorney positions that are in the appellate courts? So they vary. The students are asking me, when will the bar exam reforms take place? The law teachers are asking me, what will be the future of practice in the Philippines? Should we be focusing on international law? Should we be focusing on specialist areas of litigation? But the undercurrent is the same. When will the upgrade of their conditions be felt? And related to the question, to my response to Maria's earlier question, is when you visit all of this, and of course citizens all say that there is corruption in the judiciary, there is inefficiency, there is a complete lack of understanding of the conditions of the business community. And when you go around and you face those range of questions, you therefore understand the necessity of gaining support from the community and from the public. And I think it has to be seen that everybody owns also, to a certain extent, the problems of the judiciary. We must solve our problems, otherwise your own conditions will not improve. So you have to see that it is incumbent upon you to try to help us on a solution path that is sustained over the long run, not a stop and start and a fickle kind of thing, but a sustained program of reforming every component of what makes up the justice system.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you for being candid and for sharing your experiences while you are still Chief Justice.
Thank you.
ma'am.
Ma'am, before we go to the next question, maybe we'd like to take some questions from social media. We've grouped them together just for convenience. There have been questions regarding case backlog, delay in court cases, as well as specific questions about how the court proposes to address the slow pace of trials, particularly mentioning the Maguindanao massacre trial.
Okay. Case backlog. All right. There is no single solution to the congestion of court dockets. The congestion of court dockets, I have found after my initial studies, are concentrated in 4 areas. 4. So please note, these are in all the courts of the National Capital Judicial Region, which is Metro Manila. The second is in the Calabar zone. The third will be in Angeles, and the fourth will be in the Cebu metropolitan area. Okay. So if I am going to be strategic about how I'm going to solve congestion, I have to focus my energy on those 4 areas. So what are we doing at the moment? Right now, we are assigning some of our judges from outside of those areas to help as assisting judges in these heavily congested courts. They are also the priority in the filling up of judicial vacancies. And the JBC chairman of the executive committee is here to attest to that. We are also launching the electronic court system in Quezon City, and we are already starting to identify the next areas for which the electronic court system will be rolled out. And it will be, in all probability, be in the NCR, and they will progressively be rolled out in the most heavily congested areas until there is already a nationwide coverage of the electronic court system. We also have the Justicia Decongestion Program. Now, allow me to describe to you briefly what I launched in Quezon City 2 months ago, Teddy? About 2 months ago. We had courts which had dockets of more than 500 as our priority courts. And we assigned DCA Raul 8 or 9 teams. The first 8 teams made up of judicial supervisors, volunteer lawyers, and volunteer law students. And I'm thankful for the law schools for sending their law students to help inventory the court dockets, meaning physically inventory, read the entire case files, maybe several folios for a particular case, and make the major milestones and analyze. And after they have swept through the entire inventory, they come up with a decongestion plan that they discuss with the judges. After they already have the decongestion plan, then they are able to recommend to us whether we need to assign more judges to implement that decongestion plan that the judge assigned to that area already accepts as reasonable and doable. So with that, we hope to be able to clear a lot of the court dockets. And the highest docket that we have inventoried is the docket of Judge Panganiban, correct? Which had 2,200 cases. Okay, so after we analyze that, we are able to have a decongestion plan. Because my theory is this, there can only be a case carrying capacity over which the judge is already inefficient. I am figuring that it will be in the vicinity of 300 to 500 cases. After that, he will no longer have a genuine work-life balance, or he will be inefficient, or there will be injustice along the way. If we can allow the courts to have that smooth case-carrying capacity in all our courts, then naturally, litigation time will be faster. The other, so that's, we have already spoken about assisting judges, the decongestion plan, the electronic court system, which is a case management tool. Although the public is able to enjoy the kiosk because they can already identify the status of their cases and can predict when the next hearing will be. The beauty of the electronic court system is that the judge himself can have a plan to prioritize which cases, because the electronic court system has a way of aging the cases and alerting him about the detention time that prisoners are already serving and whose cases therefore must be expedited. So the judge can be stricter with the prosecutors and the PAOs. Now, one major reason for the delay of criminal litigation is the absence of PAO lawyers and prosecutors. For us to achieve a correct pace in litigation, we have to have a 1:1 balance. In other words, in some areas, you have one prosecutor assigned to 5 courts. And if you have one prosecutor assigned to 5 courts, you can just imagine that a case of a prisoner in detention will most likely be calendared only every 4 or 6 months. We have right now 2,200 lower court judges. We only have about 1,700 to 1,800 prosecutors, that number. So there is a 500 prosecutor gap. On the other hand, I heard that there are only about 1,500 PAO lawyers. So there is a 700 or 800 PAO lawyer gap. There is not a 1-to-1 correspondence. That's why you have hearings getting postponed intolerably. And that cannot be tolerated. And I've already communicated this problem to Secretary De Lima, and I've already mentioned this in a social function to the President. There must be a 1:1 correspondence. Then we have the judicial affidavit rule. When it is in full operation, it will cut down litigation time by 50%, because we have estimated that the presentation of the testimonies of witnesses, the direct testimonies, take up 50% of the litigation time. I had already described to you the agreement that we had with Secretary Rojas, where he will ensure the appearance of police witnesses. We are right now trying to conceptualize. We already, in addition to the podcast in the Supreme Court where you are enjoying the oral arguments, we just distributed more than 2,000 audio recording devices which are pedal activated, which will allow our stenographers to produce stenographic notes faster. And we are trying to look at the rules so that we will be able to make these audio recordings available to the parties so that they can file their pleadings without waiting for the transcripts to be finished. Attorney JJ, you understand how important that is. Nobody waits for the transcripts anymore. If we can do that, but we have to revise some of the rules to allow that. We are already also looking at electronic notices. Just imagine, if you are notified officially by SMS that the calendar for your case is on such and such a date, and you'll also receive a corresponding notification by email, and we will consider that as conclusive on you, the electronic notification system. We will cut down the 2 months that it takes for the postal registry return card to be given back to the court before the court is satisfied that notice about a particular incident has already been given to the parties. So electronic notification, we are also looking at electronic filing. As you can see in the Supreme Court, when we are ready, we are hoping that pleadings can already be filed electronically before the Supreme Court. We are looking at whether we can set up kiosks in the most populated areas so that lawyers, even those who do not have the technical facilities to do so, can find a way to scan their pleadings and mail it through that electronic kiosk that we are looking at. The problem of the congestion, the problem of prolonged litigation has to be solved by a menu of solutions. Not a single solution is sufficient.
Thank you, ma'am. Now we go to the next one who will ask a question from the Justice Beat from Philippine Star, Edu Punay.
Hi, good afternoon, Madam
Hi, Edu.
CJ. On behalf of the Jukra Press Office, we'd like to thank you for the opportunity for this, for your time to answer questions. Anyway, I'd like to go back to the pork barrel issue.
Okay.
If we can't discuss your opinions on the issue on the congressional pork, maybe we
Okay.
can tackle some about the judicial funds.
Okay.
So, you know, I'm sure you're aware of these controversies surrounding the congressional pork barrel funds. Is there a mechanism in the judiciary that prevents, that shields the judiciary's funds from similar like misuse and anomalies?
Now, with respect to the ongoing budget allocation process, I had been informed that cases are going to be filed. So prudence dictates I cannot respond to your question. Is the judiciary shielded from accountability? No. Every single centavo of the judiciary is fully audited. Even the 20% JDF is fully audited. And we show everyone, you can see how we spent the 20% of the JDF. So we cannot escape COA accounting. And okay, thank you. Okay, for the period of August 2012 to July 2013, for the total JDF collection, it reached 1 billion. 870 million of this, or 80%, was distributed to all the employees across the country on any uniform rate, more or less, and variable but little differences. And they were promptly released. So this is already out of our account, 870 million. We still have about 200 million that the law allows us to use for capital outlay and equipment purchase. Now, I will relate that to our presentation before Congress. we made a station-by-station analysis of the MOOE that had been historically provided the court. For all lower courts, the MOOE on a per-court basis would be an average of 44? The first figure, the lower, MOOE. 48? 44,000. Now, that's from the budgetary allocation. What you do then is you divide this 217 million by the number of courts nationwide, and it is an additional 44,000. Correct? Correct? Okay. So effectively, the MOOE for our courts on a monthly basis, this is a monthly basis, is only 88,000. So we showed that to the congressman. While an average, a standard agency with 14 personnel has MOOE of 2.4 million a month. So congressmen were so shocked to find out that our budgetary MOOE plus the MOOE that we can allocate to the lower courts, even if you combine them, it cannot even reach 100,000 per month per court. And they were saying, how are you able to run the system? And that's, I think, one reason why we have such inefficiency. The several congressmen have already asked us to submit a revised proposal to increase the MOOE. Because even from the JDF, this is 200 million additionally for funds that you call discretionary, meaning it is the court that can distribute them already to the courts nationwide. That really does not amount to much. So the appeal is, please, Congress, kindly give us more money so that we can have better looking chairs and tables. If you had noticed during the launching of the Justicia Decongestion Program, there was one judge who spent for her own courtroom just so that it looks a little more dignified. What is happening right now is judges and clerks of court are spending for some of the operating expenses in our courts. And some of the bills of our courts, utility bills, lend themselves to being delayed, and we have had experiences of telephone lines being cut and some utilities being denied us. We're trying to make the system more expedient so that this does not happen again. But what this all tells us is you cannot really run a court that will really be efficiently delivering justice on less than 100,000 MOOE per month. Thank you, Edu.
Thank you, Ma'am. Follow up, Edu.
Yeah, one other question, Madam CJ. I've been wanting to ask you this since a year ago. You mentioned about judicial independence, and judicial independence is often gauged, even in public perception, with the independence of a justice from the appointing authority. So for you, Madam CJ, how do you think should the Chief Justice prove independence from the President?
Well, I know I'm really independent, and I don't know whether there is really a way to prove it. But let me point out to you that in the ARM law, the ARM Election Synchronization Law, this was a pet bill of the administration. I voted against that. You remember that, Edu? Against one popular politician in Cavite who has been carried very strongly by the administration party. I was part of the minority. I was earlier part of the majority, but I lost together with my colleagues when the voting on the motion for reconsideration took place. And I haven't received any request for, or even any message to vote in accordance with the political plans of any person. And I'm grateful that they respect that. So, I hope people look at my voting pattern. But what I do not want also at the same time is for people to goad me to show independence and vote against for the sake of demonstrating independence. I should vote purely according to how my conscience dictates my vote to be.
Thank you,
Thank you, Edu.
Ma'am, maybe this is related to a question that came from Twitter. On what issue would you break ranks with the executive or the appointing power, and would you do so? I don't know if you want to answer
Well,
that separately.
I have broken ranks already with with one party, no? With the dominant party on at least 2 occasions.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, the next to ask a question will also be from Justice Beat, Philippine Daily Inquirer, Ms. Christine Avendaño.
Good afternoon.
Oh.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Christine.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Well, I hope we will have more regular press conference with you after this.
Mic? I think the mic is not working.
Just a simple question, ma'am. After 1 year, what did you expect the Chief Justice position to be, which turned out not to be so?
I'm sorry again?
What did you expect the Chief Justice position to be, which turned out not to be so?
What were failed expectations on my part?
Yes, after a year in office.
I thought the Chief Justice would be something like this, but it was not so. I don't think I don't think I had any illusions to start with. I knew I had to always get the consensus of my colleagues, and that it would, in keeping with my own personal beliefs, I had always to run things along a fairly transparent manner. There are no fiefdoms. I was very much aware of the fact that it would be very hard work, and it has been very hard work.
Ma'am, you have 18 years to serve the nation, and if ever you have this rare opportunity to, give consistency in government programs, not even a 6-year administration or a 6-year term president can give, unless, of course, his successor is aligned with him. So how would you make use of this rare opportunity in the next 18 years?
I think we in the court are fully aware that we are the leaders of an institution that must survive the changes of political fortunes. If we can allow the principles to be enduring, in the sense that everyone is aware from day one that this is probably how we will resolve cases, even if it is at great personal pain and comfort, and that we are united in this. I think that is a remarkable contribution to the strengthening of our democratic institutions. At least the rule of law will not be taken for granted by the sectors that may be politically very powerful than us.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, ma'am. Now we go to Ms. Donna Cueto of Net25.
Good afternoon po, ma'am.
Hi, Donna.
Congratulations po on your first year in office. And we members of the press are very thankful for this opportunity that you allowed us to see up close your sincerity and your spirituality. So, in your speech earlier, you've mentioned several reforms that you have already undertaken and are in the process of institutionalizing. What would be the most vital change so far for you that you have instituted po?
That I have instituted?
Yes, so far. Among the many changes and reforms that you've mentioned?
Okay. I think it is in instilling rather a sense of ownership among everyone, starting from my colleagues in the branch, in the NBank, where I try to solicit the opinions of even the most junior for major undertakings, and especially during deliberations on adjudication. And even all the way up to the lowest employee, I try to tell them that it is not possible for me to have success of any kind, and I cannot attribute it as my success unless they consider it their personal responsibility and privilege to push for reform and own it. And it is from this sense of pride about doing right that they will be able to pass on a legacy even to their families. And I think that the employees in the Supreme Court understand this very well. And I think I have even communicated this message to the judges and some of the court employees across the country, because some of the judges have been telling me that they have been doubling their efforts because they believe that we can really prove that we can be a judiciary that people can be proud of. So it is that the change in the talk that has been happening. It is in the availability of a listening ear. I would think that as an important achievement. Thank you. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you, ma'am. Next question, Donna.
And a follow-up. You mentioned earlier that you are reaching out to our world, and thank you for that. The press has been regarded by judges, by members of the judiciary with some apprehension, if not fear. We cannot interview them. When I was still covering the justice beat, rare are the cases where we can interview judges, much more the justices of the Supreme Court, or even the Supreme Court Chief Justice. So thank you for this opportunity. And you mentioned institutional reforms, systemic problems that are hurdles to what you want to achieve for this, the title of your is trial, what's this? Wait lang po I'll check muli. It's a year of trial, transition, and change. So you mentioned these systemic problems and entrenched constraints that you are facing. My question is, how will you solve those problems? How will you address those systemic problems in a way that you are judicially allowed? Especially those functions which are of a legislative nature. So there, I sense that you want to make very great changes for the people because you want to help to uplift the human dignity. As you mentioned, you've gotten in touch with those prisoners who have been suffering for decades probably in our prison system. So how will you address those problems that are tied up with other functions not within your bounds? Thank you.
That is a difficult approach, actually, that must always be well calibrated. In the first place, I cannot solve I cannot solve the problems of the judiciary. We can solve the problems of the judiciary. Our colleagues and the employees of the judiciary can solve it. And as I always say, attributable always to the help of Almighty God. But now, what is the fine line I must tread in order to reach out to the two other branches of government? Remember that I am required to always exercise and be careful about the independence of the judiciary. At the same time, there are legislative proposals that must be put on the table. In my very different conversations with different people, because people have come to me and asked me for ideas for bills that they will be filing in Congress, I have been freely discussing my thoughts. And some have gone to the extent of trying to write down those kinds of legislative proposals. So that is one. And of course, the official venue for us to improve our budget situation was the hearing in the Appropriations Committee. And we were able to prove centavo to centavo that we really need to have a lot more support. While we need a lot more logistics, a lot more funds to help us build a modern judiciary, what I understand the process requires is that the legislators themselves must believe that it is in the nation's interest to have a very strong judiciary. To sell that idea to them, that it is in everyone's interest to have a strong judiciary. And it is in Congress's interest to provide more funds to the judiciary. And that is why I'm coming before the country, before the public. Ayan na po, nakikiusap nga po ako sa taong bayan na kung ano man pong impluensya ang kaya nyo upang mahubog ang pag-allocate ng pera sa mga sangay ng gobyerno. Ito pong judikatura ang totoong nangangailangan ng suporta nyo. Pagkat ang aming kapabilidad po na impluensyahan at sabihan po ang mga kongresista na kailangan namin ng pera ay may hangganan. Pwede po namin sabihin, pero alam po nilang hindi kami pwedeng mangako ng kahit ano at hindi po namin pwedeng pag-usapan ang mga kasong nasa hudikatura. So nasa sitwasyon po kami na totoong susubukan ang kapabilidad namin at ang determinasyon namin na maging independent sa executive at legislative. Sabihin na nga po na susubukan po ang talagang independence namin kasi hindi ho kami talaga naman pong makikipag-usap tungkol sa mga bagay na hinihingi po ng mga tao, no? Ng mga mambabatas. Hindi ko naman po sinasabing may hihingin sila, no? Ang sinasabi ko po nasa sa loobin po kaya ng mga kababayan natin na sabihin naman po sa mga kongresista, isama nyo naman po at alalahanin ang hudikatura na wala man lang bahay hustisya ng sarili nila. Maari po bang bigyan nyo po sila ng karagdagang pera para mapapinturahan po at yung mga court records ay magkaroon naman ng karampatang storage space. Maari ho kayang magawa ho tayo ng atmosperya sa mga courtrooms natin na pagpasok po ng mga litigants ay magkakaroon sila ng damdamin na mayroon naman po palang dignidad sa lugar na ito. At ang hustisya po ay binibigay sa isang marangal na paraan. Hindi lamang sa salita na ginagamit ng mga huwes na legal pakinggan, kundi pati na po sa physical surroundings ng courthouses. Siguro yun po ang ipinapaabot ko sa inyo, kaya itong talakayan po ng hudikatura at nating mga miyembro ng media ay isang paraan po upang mapangalagaan ang independensya ng hudikatura sa gitna ng paghingi namin ng karagdagang suporta. Salamat po.
Thank you very much po.
Thank you, Donna. Next is Anjo Alimario, Solar TV.
Hello. Good afternoon, Madam Chief Justice. Hi,
Hi,
ma'am.
Anjo.
Ma'am, there's an entry in the annual report, particularly in the statement of allotments, obligations, and balances, mentioning subsidy to NGOs and POs amounting to 37 million pesos. Now, what are these NGOs and how do you make sure that these are legitimate NGOs? And do you have a say of selecting these NGOs?
Si Attorney Mel, membro po kayo ng IBP, no? Legitimate po ba ang IBP? Ayan po, sinagot na po sa kanya niya. Yung 30 million po, pumupunta doon sa Legal Aid Committee ng IBP. Kasi ang mga iba't ibang sangay po ng IBP ay nagbibigay ng legal aid para sa mga indigents. Kasi kulang ang PAW. Di ba po, Attorney Mel, kulang po ang mga PAW natin. Oh, kaya umaayuda po ang mga chapters ng IBP. Doon po napupunta yon. Yun po.
Still on corruption, ma'am, how widespread is corruption in the judiciary and what have you done to curb it?
Hindi, yung papel ko kasi, I go by evidence. Yung kwento at mga maliliit na istorya, mayroon yan. Okay? Pero yung ebidensya ng extent, wala yan. Kaya nga, in response to the question of Dean Jokno, yun po ang kukulangan ng judiciary eh. Yung ability to launch hard-nosed investigations. Kaya nga may pinag-aaralan tayong iba't ibang approaches to solve this. I'm not ready to give you even an estimate because it will be a completely baseless estimate.
Thank you, Anjo. Next, we go to Ina Reformina, ABS-CBN.
Good afternoon,
Hi,
ma'am,
Ina.
and greetings on your first anniversary.
Salamat.
It's difficult to be one of the last to ask the questions because practically most of my questions have been asked. But let me go to case disposal at the Supreme Court, ma'am. Specifically, you already discussed prolonged litigation of criminal cases at the trial courts. Let me go to the Supreme Court. It's not new to you that when people hold rallies in front of the Supreme Court in Faura, they talk about justice delayed, justice denied. So what is the current disposal rate at the Supreme Court and bank since you assumed your post as Chief Justice, ma'am? I'd like to go further and ask you what is your disposal rate ever since you became Chief Justice, and if it's not too much to ask, if you can also give us some data on case input and output as well.
Okay. Wala sa akin yung, the data I have on my own case disposal is not with me now. But I started off when I was appointed in 2010 with 550 cases immediately given to me. And as I was learning the ropes, it reached 800. As of 2 months ago, it is at 540 or something like that, and it will be probably be around 500 by the time this year ends. So it's improving. Okay. When a justice is appointed, that justice inherits the caseload of the one who vacated the post. One justice, for example, inherited a caseload of 1,500. I cannot blame that justice if at this point his caseload is still above 1,000. But there are those of us who have had a longer term and their case is getting to be a more manageable, 200 to 200 something. There are some of us who are right now have a manageable caseload of around 400. So it is what we have been doing right now to expedite these cases is that first, I have said that we are right now trying to, we had expedited election cases so that they do not always become moot and academic. most of the election cases, unfortunately, reach us when the term only has about a year to a year and a half. That's why I'm trying to find a way how we can even expedite the turnaround time faster. We also have given more emphasis to writing smaller resolutions, unsigned resolutions. We do not publish all our decisions on the website because SCRA will be forced to publish all of them in hard print, and the trees of the Philippines will increasingly vanish. So what we do is we decide that only those of doctrinal value or of those of greater importance merits a full-length decision. We have resorted to having unsigned resolutions in shorter form, especially when the decisions are just affirming cases that have been brought from the Court of Appeals on standard cases like rape, drugs, and labor cases. We have also created, there is also a zero backlog committee where the oldest cases are being prioritized. You cannot imagine the surprise of those who have been appointed to the Supreme Court, especially those coming from the Court of Appeals. They are just shocked at the amount of work that awaits them. Because it's not easy to dispose of several hundreds of cases when every case has to be deliberated upon. The deliberation process is a very taxing process. And hopefully, you can really see improvements over the long term. But that is the kind of volumes that we are talking about.
Follow-up
follow-up?
question. Ma'am, first off, what is the biggest misconception about the judiciary that you would want to correct, given this opportunity now that people are watching us and listening to us live? And second to that, it's not a third question. It's part of the second
No,
question.
it's a difficult question, actually.
Part of that question is, what is the biggest untruth or misconception written or spoken about you, and what would you want to say now in order to rectify or correct that?
Ina, you've actually just asked six
I
questions
know.
in 2 questions. Anyway.
That we are happy with the way things are. That is the biggest misconception. We are actually unhappy with the way things are. The judiciary, everyone, we have been racking our brains to try to find a solution to expediting these cases. Many of us, including in the Supreme Court, remember, are new appointees to the court. Most of us were appointed in 2009. So we have been pushing to find many simultaneous reform measures that can be put in place. So yun po, wag po kayong maniwala na naniniwala kaming mga huwes na everything is all right. Hindi po kami masaya sa estado ng napakaraming kaso sa mga korte. Alam po namin ang suffering nyo. Alam po namin how it is difficult for any family to sustain a litigation over the long term. And we especially know what it is for a breadwinner of a poor family to be in jail. And the kind of untold adverse consequences that can happen. Yun po ang una. Now, yung untruth tungkol sa akin, or misconception, marami naman pong hula-hula tungkol sa akin. Hindi po kasi yung mga the real story revealed, mga ganun, ano? Hindi ko po nakikita ngayon, no, sa forum na ito, ang usefulness ng ganito. Kasi alam ko po, for 18 years, mangyayari yan eh. So bakit po ko ito try na to rectify? Kung kaya ma-rectify at kung sana may mga mabubuting loob na magre-rectify, sila na mag-rectify. Pero kung isasama ko pa yung depensa sa sarili ko, sa dinami-dami po ng trabaho ko, masyadong mahirap na burden na yon. I believe ultimately that my reputation, that vindication will not come from me, but it will come at a later time. Hindi ako ang magsisimula ng ganito kasi nakaka-distract po yun. Yung you try to save yourself, you try to defend yourself. It can be a destructive process. So, hindi ko po tuloy nakita itong forum na ito na as a forum for that, because the message was really to communicate what should be done to help the judiciary. So, if it's okay with you, hindi ko talaga napag-isipan yan. So, maybe I will regret this decision and I'll come back to you and help me.
Thank you,
Okay,
pa.
thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Ina. Next, we go to Micael Flores, Business World.
Good
Hello,
afternoon, Chief
Mikael.
Justice.
Hi.
Thank you for this opportunity. My question centers mainly on vacant salas or branches in lower courts. So for context and background, please correct me if I'm wrong with the details. The Supreme Court, through the Office of the Court Administrator, certifies to the JBC the salas or branches that need to be filled in lower courts. The JBC then submits the shortlist to the President, who appoints the members of the judiciary. It is also my understanding that portions of the salary of trial court judges come from the court's savings, as well as other funds of the judiciary, to which the Supreme Court has complete control. Now, to my question, isn't there a conflict of interest on the part of the court, considering that instead of certifying the urgent need to fill those vacancies, the court may opt not to recommend or certify the need for those vacancies to save on costs? You mentioned a while ago the budget constraints of the judiciary. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me walk you further back through the legislative process this time of creation of courts. The judiciary cannot stop Congress if it wants to create courts even in areas where the need for courts is not dire. That's why you have courts all over the country. Some have as low as 10. I've seen one, 30. And there is even one Justice Lagman that has 0, right? 0. Okay. Now, if you are going to appoint 4 people to a court with 0 caseload, what does that talk about the fiduciary responsibility of the judiciary over the funds of the people? Okay. Now, do we certify maliciously? Because that's the underlying question there. Just so that there could be savings? No. No. We want to solve the case backlog. In fact, that's why we have been pulling out judges from the provinces and assigning them to Metro Manila, because we have to solve the backlog. We are unhappy about the situation. Now, is there a conflict of interest? No, we do not. I do not, and my colleagues do not, look at the savings that we will save by not appointing a judge to a court with 0 caseload as a way so that we can distribute more money. The real solution is to have an indexing of the salary of judges in a way that you can make them more impervious to the attraction of the material world. What I'm saying is that we should put ourselves in the position of judges who could have landed fat salaries. And Attorney Mel Santa Maria knows the kind of salaries you can command in Makati, if you're a good one, or in Taguig City, or in Ortigas. So that a judge who will forego imagining that kind of lifestyle cannot be attracted even when he has a multi-billion peso case that only he will decide at the trial court level. That is the kind of just system that we should be trying to look at. I was in talks with the Chief Justice of Singapore, and they index their salaries to a very high level. It's amazing how much they can pay their judges. In Malaysia, high court judges, appellate court judges are given their own houses with many of their operating costs subsidized by government. So that the idea is to remove the attractiveness of financial enticements. So if you think that we are doing this, no. In fact, I will have to tell you that we have improved the vacancy rate from the previous vacancy rate of 25%. If the president acts on the nomination lists that are with him, we will bring it down to somewhere between 17 to 18%. That's already a 7 to 8% reduction of the vacancy rate. We cannot hurry filling up, especially in the far-flung areas where you don't have cases. But we are in a hurry to fill up in the heavily congested areas. Thank you, Mikel.
Follow-up?
For my second question, you already mentioned before the need of the judiciary for discretionary or intelligence funds for purposes of investigating alleged erring members of the judiciary. What other functions of the court would need the use of these kinds of funds?
No, I'm not saying that I'm asking for it. No. Please note, I said we don't have. Right? We don't have. Because I am not yet sure that we ourselves should be conducting these kinds of hard-nosed investigation. I have not yet reached that point. Perhaps I will even be more comfortable to completely give it to the NBI or for the court to give it to the fact-finding stage to be given to the ombudsman. That's something we in the court can discuss. To ask for discretionary funds will be a major policy decision. That's why we have to really think about it carefully. We are not asking for discretionary funds. Just please be clear about that.
Thank you, Chief
Thank you.
Justice.
We go to Tech Torres, Philippine Daily Inquirer.
Good afternoon, ma'am. First of all, thank you very much for this very rare opportunity, and we hope this will become a regular thing. Ma'am, for my first question, there are calls to eradicate or at least reduce the influence of the executive branch, particularly the president, in appointing members of the judiciary. There are already several proposals made by various groups, such as doing away with nominations and letting the JBC conduct independent searches for possible candidates. What reforms have you undertaken to address this call, ma'am?
First of all, the nomination and appointment process is defined in the Constitution. So as Chief Guardian of the Constitution, I have no say on that. I'm not even advocating any change because it's already defined in the Constitution. Now, what Justice Lagman here can attest to is the kind of professional inputs that we want. This is the vision of the JBC. Can we become something like a professional headhunter? You know, for top executives, and why should we not consider a single judge as important as a top executive? For us to look for the best and the brightest, there is even a proposal to even think of plucking out a talented young person even from the law school and guide his or her career so that he can eventually become a judge. If we can transform the JBC into a professional firm, headhunting entity that will really search out the best and get inputs from the community, I think that is the best way we can help. And eventually, we can even think of enriching the nomination process by perhaps making qualitative assessments of the nominees that we are sending in the nominee lists to the president. But that is a long way off. We are still streamlining our processes. We are in the process of studying an online application form, so it does not become too much of a burden. We have already looked at our transparent interview process for important posts. We are trying to look for good survey instruments to find the pulse of the public. And yes, we are hiring more professionals, those who are good in human resources. Talent, finding talents, identifying core values, predicting ability to endure the life of a judge. And our questions during the JBC, they're becoming more robust. We're already telling the judges what they are in for. Usually it was, what is your philosophy, etc. But this time we're telling them about the reality. Are you willing to go and be in charge of a court where you will find yourself many times pulling out your pocket the money for pizza or fried chicken because you need to fund the overtime of your staff, and there's no overtime expense being given automatically to you by the court? Are you willing to yourselves before sometimes to undertake emergency renovations because the system is so clogged right now that you cannot even undertake that for them? It's a reality check, what we are trying to do, if they have the fortitude for that kind of life. And the life of a judge can be a lonely life because to be perceived as someone who is, who cannot be influenced, you will have to naturally limit the kind of social contacts you will be having. Thank you, Tej.
Ma'am, for my next question, what is the biggest obstacle you consider to achieving your goals, and what measures have you been doing to address this?
Biggest obstacle. Well, I've already discussed many obstacles. And in my answer to Maria, I spoke about the fact that life for me has been about overcoming one obstacle after another. Now, if trying to identify the biggest obstacle means that we can move judicial reform faster, is there a way, can we devise a way to have a national conversation immediately about judicial reform and generate the consensus about that? You see, we're spread out across how many islands? I find myself having to hop on a plane for whatever spare time I have to have one-on-ones with some people. I'm trying to create a video conferencing system or a teleconferencing system so I cut down on travel time. But we must have a national consensus on judicial reform. And the fact that we are so geographically structured means that we may have to make intelligent use of information